Who's in, who's out after Minnesota Vikings minicamp? I don't know if you're going to like the answer. Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast, where we're always trying to learn something new. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day, especially if you're here in June every day. You're true blue, all right? You're diehard. I love you. This would not be possible without those of you who listen year round. So thank you for indulging me. We do have minicamp to talk about, so there is at least a little bit going on, but we're now in like the dead of dead periods now that all that's over. So today we're going to talk about sort of the conclusion of that and some depth chart stuff, as well as the quarterback situation. Sam Darnold officially QB1, as like Kevin O'Connell went on TV and said it. JJ McCarthy talked about the footwork he's working on. So there's actually a few things to discuss, not to mention if you were holding your breath over that tampering thing with the Falcons, that is now resolved. But we also have an entry into the Everyman Series today as well. So let's start with the depth chart stuff. So Alec Lewis posted the depth chart that he observed at OTAs. He was there for a lot of it and was at least able to get not like his depth chart projection or his opinions of the players, but just like who was rotating where, who was playing where. And it's all very, very chalk. I'm not going to go over the entire thing. I'll link it in the show notes. Yell at me if I forget. But you can go over it if you want, but there's not a lot of surprises. The veterans are up top. The rookies have to earn their keep. A lot of rookies are in, the third team with the second team, even, Dallas Turner, second team, he's a backup. Like, even though maybe that might not hold, it's the way it is to start OTAs. You can think of it as pole position. That'll all be worked out. According to Kevin O'Connell, who did a whole big media circuit, he talked to Colin Cowherd. He went on NFL Network. He went on a whole bunch of things. And, that will all be worked out over the first couple weeks, is the way that Kevin O'Connell put it, of camp. So by the end of the second week of camp, that is the depth chart that we'll probably have the answers to all of our questions about position battles and stuff. Although there's not like a ton of them. As it stands right now, Brandon Powell holds the wide receiver 3 job. You got Jalen Naylor, you got like Trent Sherfield. Those guys could maybe gun for it, but it feels like Powell's to lose. At corner, I'll be curious to see if Shaq Griffin indeed keeps his job or if it's a Joejuan Williams situation where he was, with the ones for OTAs, but kind of fell away and was at the bottom of the depth chart by the end of training camp. Obviously, you have the quarterback situation. Sam Darnold is QB1, Nick Mullins with the 2s, JJ McCarthy with the 3s. That's the way it's been the whole time. If that freaks you out, we'll talk about that in a second. But then you have the disappointing thing, which we should all brace for it, is you're probably going to see some 2022 guys get cut. Whether it's Cine or Booth or Asamoah or two of them or all of them, I think you're going to start to see those guys. We're going to move on from those guys. And it gives us, here, we can declare, I think, and it's not over by any chance, stretch of the imagination. Someone can come out, have a great camp, right? Like, they haven't had a chance to, rise up the depth chart any more than anybody else has because it's OTAs. But like, if Cine comes out and has a great camp and a great preseason and he makes the team and he reclaims his, like, he could do that. But it does not seem like that is happening. And we can kind of dispense with it's still early in their career and go, okay, this thing's on life support. We're done here, right? If you haven't already, which a lot of you did after like 2 seconds. So there you go. Now you were early, but now you're not anymore. And I think whenever you have a draft class like that, which happens, there will be, you cannot follow a sports team and not like have to deal with sometimes your team effed up a draft pick, or a whole class. Right. And I think the way to approach that is to ask, okay, why? What happened? What's the reason for this? And is it something that we're worried about continuing to affect the Vikings? Right. And I think if your brain has 2 cells in it, you go Quasi bad, and then you don't think about it anymore. But we have more brain cells here on Locked On Vikings, okay? We want to think a little harder. So instead, let's think about the process of that and what was different. And was there anything majorly different in 2022? Well, yes. There was Ed Donatel. He's not here anymore. And because Kwesi had just taken over, he still had all the old scouts. Just by quirk of the calendar, if you are a new GM, you're working with the last guy's scouting team, and they're like 2 months away from the draft. You cannot bring in a whole new scouting team and expect them to redo the entire work of the draft on a whim. You're going to make those decisions after the draft. And honestly, yeah, sure, it gives you a little bit of a chance to get to know everybody and evaluate them truly and see who you want to keep and who you don't. By now, the entire scouting staff is like most of it, I think, has turned over. Maybe some people survived it, but a lot of the scouting staff has turned over since Kwesi took over. We got Kwesi's guys now. So if your take on Lewis Cine is just they are dumb and didn't evaluate it right, and they picked a bad player because they're idiots, well, whoever was responsible for that, like whoever had that evaluation, is probably gone now. So you can take comfort in that at least. But also you had the Donatel thing. That's a different defense, and it worked really poorly. It was bad. But it also asks different things. That was very much a back off, eyes on the play, watch for the ball, trigger, and go. Brian Flores is asking for way different stuff. He is still wanting you to like trigger quickly on the ball, but for one, you don't have as many hats rallying in the Flores defense. It's one of the weaknesses of the Flores defense is that it requires a lot more running from people. It requires, you're doing a lot more disguising and a lot more exotic alignments and stuff. And so you have stuff where guys will, sugar the A gap and then back off somewhere, and they're doing a whole extra thing. It's a lot harder for them to rally to the ball. Their eyes are being coached to be in different places. And so especially as a safety, as Lewis Cine, you don't necessarily get to miss the tackle and have like all your teammates come rally and make it okay. That was a like one of the draws of the Fangio defense is you always have a bunch of guys around the ball. Flores, not so much, so you have to be able to tackle. And Lewis Cine missed a bunch of tackles in the preseason, and I think that might have just been it for him. And maybe he can get better at that and prove that he deserves another chance here. But I think that's the end. And it's, that's just a thing that he was brought in to do, and now he's being asked to do something else. It's not a coincidence that the Ed Donatel class, only the defensive players on the Ed Donatel class are the ones in trouble here. Ed Ingram, his job appears to be under no pressure at all. Alec Lewis did speculate that maybe Reisner could be a question there, but there has been no indication. We're going to do this again with an O-lineman. We're like, is it really a competition when he takes no first team reps? Show me Reisner taking first team reps at right guard, and then we'll cover it. But the offensive player isn't the one, right? Like Ty Chandler, he's growing and having a fairly normal trajectory for a 6th round draft pick, and the defensive players are the ones falling apart. Well, yeah, because they were drafted for a different defense than the one we run. Like that doesn't make a lot of confusion to me. So anyways, that's that. Of course, there's still a little bit of that book left to be written before we truly put the stamp on it. But what we did see a stamp get put on was the Falcons tampering thing. This will be really quick. The Falcons docked a 5th round pick and fined some money. People are kind of mad. It seems like it's a slap on the wrist. I got 2 thoughts, I guess, worth sharing. For one, I really hope that you didn't get your hopes up for the Vikings getting a draft pick. That was never going to happen. Unless the Falcons and Vikings worked separately to resolve this out of court, if you will, to resolve this kind of independently and without the intervention of the league. But that's not the process that happened here. It was never the process that happened here. It was always going to be the league investigates. What did the Falcons do? What are we going to punish them for? That's the only way that like picks will go from one team to another. So if you ever thought that the Vikings were going to get a 1st round pick, or if you thought that they were going to get a pick at all, you were misled. You were lied to. If you've been lied to a couple times in the last 2 weeks and by the same guy, maybe you should think about who you trust. I'll leave it at that. But the second thing is I've seen people say, whoa, what a slap on the wrist. What the heck? Why wouldn't you tamper all the time if that's the only punishment? And to that, I have to say, yeah, yes, they tamper all the time. That's what they do. You're welcome. Everyone tampers constantly. The NFL Combine is basically TamperCon. That's when all the agents and GMs all get together and have conversations they're not supposed to have. And yeah, the punishment probably isn't enough to discourage that, and it is not discouraging that at all. If you're like, whoa, the Falcons got an advantage over other teams. No, they didn't. All right, everybody got an advantage the same way. The Vikings got to talk to all their free agents too. They had some pretty suspiciously quick contracts go themselves the last year or two. So That's just something that they do just like everybody else does. If you really want to address tampering, you either have to enforce the rule more, and everybody is going to losing draft picks over it, and you're going to have a huge controversy, or you should do what I've been suggesting the whole time and just sanction that and just say, yeah, that's just fine. If you want to talk at the combine, you can talk at the combine. We'll call it TamperCon and just let it be legal, because it's just what happens anyways. And I don't really see the point in trying to stop people. I get that you want, teams to have their own exclusive negotiating rights to their own players before they hit free agency. But by the combine, you've already been out of the season for a month. You've had that opportunity, and those players know what you're offering. And I also think that it's way unfair to the players to make them decide on a contract before they know what else is out there. So I'm fully in favor of the combine being just good old TamperCon, and that's just fine. But, since Kirk Cousins did implicate the Falcons directly on the podium, and you had to make some showing out of that, I guess you got to take something from him, but a slap on the wrist feels appropriate to me. Let's go back to depth chart stuff with the quarterbacks next, and then we'll go to the Everyman Series. Today's episode of Locked On Vikings is brought to you by eBay Motors. eBay Motors is the best place to get whatever it is that your car needs. And your car is a part of your life in such an intrinsic way. Not only is it the thing that gets you from point A to point B and reflective of your lifestyle, right? You got a big truck, you're probably using that big truck for something different than the guy who's got a little sporty zippy car, right? But also it's a sense of style. It's an expression of your lifestyle and who you are, the color you pick, the upholstery you pick, and all of that. So whether it is something aesthetic like a roof rack or LED headlights, or something under the hood that needs to keep your car running, go check out eBay Motors. eBay Motors has you covered with over 122 million parts for your ride or die. And with the eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride specifically every time, or your money back. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Thanks a million for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day. When you are done here, I want you to go check out Locked On Minnesota Sports. Go check out their YouTube page and find the Hot Wings challenge that I did. All right, I suffered for it. Please go watch it and go enjoy my suffering. I had to do a little bit of a Vikings trivia game while my mouth was on fire from Hot Wings as a punishment for losing a bet. It was very, very fun. Go check it out on the Minnesota Football Party. Moving on with this episode of Locked On Vikings. Thank you so much for hanging out. Sam Darnold, QB1. It is now in the ether officially. I mean, we knew, right? But Kevin O'Connell went on a whole bunch of podcasts and stuff and essentially confirmed Darnold would be our QB1 to open training camp. Now, does that mean he's going to be QB1 week 1? Officially undetermined, but still probably. But we got to go through camp and you got to play the game, right? But heavy favorite to be QB1 week 1. That's pretty. That shouldn't be news to anybody. If you paid any attention to the Vikings at all, that's where we're at. But I do want to address the idea of oh no, JJ McCarthy can't beat out Sam Darnold. I think a lot of people, and again, this is like a 2 brain cell take, will look at it like Sam Darnold's the 28th best QB or whatever, 35th best QB in the league, whatever you want to call him. And And JJ McCarthy is behind him, which means JJ McCarthy must be worse than he must be the 40th best QB in the league. Oh my God, the Vikings made such a bad draft pick. It's that kind of ranking pilled, I can only engage with this via a table kind of thought. And I want to open our minds a little bit, right? Now, if you're listening to this in June, you're an everyday or listening to Locked On Vikings in June, I'm going to guess you do not have much of a problem opening your mind a little more than that. And that's probably not the way you were thinking about it. And to that, I say congratulations. You have more than 2 brain cells. We love to see it. But the way this is designed to work is that JJ McCarthy is not in a place where he's being evaluated at all. We're not looking at, the coaches aren't currently looking at him and going, he's not as good as Sam Darnold. Yeah, we got to keep Sam Darnold out there. No, they're not expecting him to be any better than Sam Darnold right now because he's a work in progress. He's in the middle of changing his footwork. He has very new habits. New habits are delicate. If you've ever tried to learn anything new, or if you've ever tried to, say, quit smoking, or, learn a new technique. If you've ever been in athletics at all, you definitely know what I'm talking about. But you're trying to build habit, or whether it's a habit of eating better or changing your sleep schedule, anything where you're trying to build a new habit. The first few days of that, it's very fragile. The first little while of trying to build a new habit, if anything messes you up, right? How many stories have you ever heard or maybe even experienced of somebody who tried to quit smoking and then had a stressful week and had to light up a cigarette, right? That first couple of weeks, if those get stressful, it gets so much harder. Now you have a stressful week a year after you quit smoking, maybe not. Once you have that habit built, it's a lot more resilient. So putting him in, even telling him, hey, we would love to see you start week 1, instead of telling him, you know what, it's fine, we don't care. You're ready when you're ready, and we're fine with that, right? If you tell him, hey, what if you started week 1? That'd be very cool. And he tries to push it, and you do put him out there week 1, and he has these fragile new habits, you're just begging him to revert to whatever he was exactly in college. And that's not a pro player. That's a college player. Even pro-ready college players are only pro-ready, not pro players. Once you get into the pros, there are things you have to change. So Sam Darnold being QB1 and Nick Mullins being QB2 for the same reasons, if Sam Darnold gets hurt, you don't want to suddenly be exposed to all these problems, is firmly what I would expect until comfortably into the season, right? If JJ McCarthy proves me wrong and starts week 1, I'm doing backflips. That means one of two things. Either he's way ahead of schedule and that rocks, or for whatever reason, the Vikings felt rushed and we've got like a did ownership push this situation, which I don't really see the Wilfs doing. I don't really see the second one being the case, but that would be the other thing, is like somehow they rushed it. And that's very bad news, but I don't know. If he starts week 1, considering the way that the Vikings have talked about their plan with JJ McCarthy and how they're very comfortable with the developmental plan that they have, and they like his progress along that plan. If he starts week 1, that probably just means it went faster than they thought, and everybody's really, really happy about it. Okay, I'm getting on a weird tangent, but the McVay side, as of late, has been a lot more about 3 and 5 step drops out of shotgun and more spread game kind of stuff, whereas the Shanahan side has diverged more into a run game, play action kind of version of the same system and the same terminology and kind of the same tools, but they just have been deploying it different. It's very, very fascinating. But anyways, so in our world, in the Vikings world, which is a McVay-inspired world, there's a little bit more drop back going on. And that means that every play has very particular timings and different kinds of dropbacks that pair with those timings. So if you're going to run, a 15-yard basic or a 16-yard corner or a 7-yard out, all of those have specific timings that you're expecting. How long does it take a receiver, give or take, depending on how fast that guy is, this route at this depth? And then you have to pair the right footwork with it. And that's a memorization game. It won't be in the play call. It's just like when you hear flag bow, that goes with this particular drop back. So part of it's the memorization game and knowing the playbook inside and out. But the other part of it is getting a lot more variety in the dropbacks you have access to and getting them all really, really, really consistent. And that's just part of transitioning. That's just, you didn't do that in college. That's just the NFL being harder. And just needing that kind of variety to attack much better NFL defenses, right? Not to mention the mechanical changes and improvements in his footwork that we've been able to see. You can go watch my Patreon video on that, by the way, at patreon.com/LukeBraunNFL, or I did a show on it last Monday, I believe, that had a lot of the same themes. JJ McCarthy didn't go into that one in much detail, which is fine, but that's also part of it. So there's a lot of stuff that he is working on in the middle of learning, and if you put him into a live game situation where there's no time to think, no time to stop and teach, no time to really solidify those habits, because instead you're thinking about how this corner likes to play off coverage, and when he does it, he likes to open the gate, so I want to audible into a whatever, like all of that stuff is so granular and week to week that it will completely torch your ability to learn new things and improve upon who you were as a college player, which I think to make it in the NFL, even the best college players still have to find a way to develop into something more. The NFL is just a different world. You're not just going to be a dominant college player that shows up to the NFL and dominate in the NFL without attacking that. The all-time greats continued to attack it forever and ever and ever and ever. And the ones that sort of topped out were the ones that just remained the same player that they were in college. Next up, let's get into today's entry into the Everyman Series. I only ever really engage with the world of football recruiting when I'm doing this series. When I think about and try to tell these stories of kids that are trying to determine where their future is going to be. And I'm always struck by just how weird socially this process is. I'm not trying to cast judgment on anybody or anybody's job or anything like that. It's just this really weird system to me that I'm super not used to. You really have, coaches that are middle-aged guys that are trying to develop with, a particular intention, develop a relationship with like a teenager. It's weird. Those people are not going to have anything in common. I just always imagine how forced it has to be because their experiences are so different. But that's the job if you're going to be a college coach, and a lot of college coaches utterly hate that part of the job because that's not what they showed up to, schmooze a 16-year-old, right? But that's kind of what the job has to be. You have to go do a bunch of brown nosing and hope that kid picks your school over the 3 other ones in your conference, or else he's playing for a rival. So when you're a 4-star recruit out of a Texas high school, by the way, McKinney, Texas, and this is Tyrese Robinson. He'll be the subject of today's Everyman Series, which, if you are new here, that's the series where we talk about the backstory and the journey to the NFL for every new Minnesota Viking. Everybody who's new here, we're getting to know them on a more human level. That's not just their stats and their games started and their draft their draft grades from someone, right? This is more about the human side. But anyways, when you're a 4-star recruit out of Texas, you're getting calls from everywhere the whole time. As a tackle in high school, he dominated enough to get attention from everywhere, and he had conversations for a long time with the University of Texas and Baylor and Oklahoma. And the weird part about it is you'll very often talk to these people for years, and they're really developing a true relationship with you. They know you. They know your mom. They know your sister. They understand, your family dynamic, and they know what your favorite kind of music is and what video games you like to play, right? And then you got to pick one. It's like The Bachelor. You just got to say it's like 3 people all trying to get to know you really well, all with the implicit understanding that, hey, for 2 of you, you're probably going to be kind of mad at me after this. For Tyrese Robinson, between those 3 schools, he'll end up choosing Oklahoma. And he was a hyped enough prospect where he could have done the national signing day announcement. I'm choosing Oklahoma. Thanks to everybody. But he didn't really want that attention. And again, I think of this and I think of it from the perspective of me when I was that age, when I was 16 or 17. I didn't have the social skills to deal with that complicated situation. I would have bungled this so bad. But he ends up taking Oklahoma, and Texas and Baylor, he just kind of stops taking their calls. And he says, I think the way he phrased it was eventually they got the memo that they hadn't been picked. But what an odd social interaction that this has caused. That, by the way, in the world of recruiting is entirely normal. In the world of recruiting, and only in the world of recruiting. And I guess spin-offs of The Bachelor and The Bachelorette. Anyways, he ends up at Oklahoma. He was a tackle in college. They decide to move him to guard. So he'll redshirt a year for that, and then his redshirt freshman year, he gets in for a couple of games, but it's still spot duty. And then he becomes the same thing we hear with all of the linemen. They're, really hard workers, and they're a rock, and they're these, steady Eddie types, because that's what linemen always are the steady, dependable big guy in front, So he plays at right guard for the next 2 seasons. He starts every game, and he's slated to start in his senior season. But his senior season, which is 2021, is a weird one for the Oklahoma Sooners. Oklahoma is a very prestigious O-line school. There's a lot of NFL offensive linemen that went through the Oklahoma Sooners. But in 2021, their whole unit is in flux. And what they end up doing with that is they take one of the only 2 players on that team that was guaranteed a starting job, which was Tyrese Robinson, and moving him out to tackle again, where he played in high school. So look, this works for him and against him. He gets to say, I've got some guard experience and some tackle experience. But because he had spent 4 years now at guard, tackle was sort of a distant memory, and it totally interrupts his momentum. Momentum is this concept we've talked about in all of these Everyman Series entries, where there is this path that a college player takes to the NFL that is like the typical one where, your junior, senior year of high school, you're a superstar on the varsity team and you get all these offers and you pick one and you go to that college and maybe you redshirt for a year, but eventually as your college time goes on, you play more and more until you're a junior, senior leader on the team and you're the best guy. And then you go into the NFL draft or after the NFL draft and you do well enough to get the attention of an NFL team and get drafted or not. If anything happens to interrupt that, an injury causes you to miss a year, a position switch causes you to maybe not be so good, something weird happens in the pre-draft process that causes you to fall further than you were supposed to, it's very often impossible to climb back out of that. And, I talked about this yesterday to some, but I too often take it for granted that like we're only ever looking at the people where that didn't happen. So it might seem like if you hear, yeah, he had to switch positions and it made his senior year not as good. Like 90% of people, that ends it. Whoops, you're a dentist now. Good luck. That's done. But not for Tyrese Robinson, who at least does well enough to get a shot with the Washington Commanders after going undrafted after that senior season. And they're going to move him back to guard, by the way. So this whole tackle thing was just it wasn't the best thing for his draft stock at all. It was probably the best thing for the Oklahoma Sooners, which is of course what the coaches there are going to care about. And it's just this unfortunate circumstance that you kind of have to chalk up to, well, happens, which when it's your entire dream of playing football and you just have to go, well, happens, I lost it. That's a hard pill to swallow. And I do not envy Tyrese Robinson for having to deal with that circumstance and the impact that it'll have moving forward, because he will not make the Washington Commanders at guard now a year out of playing it. And he'll end up on the Eagles practice squad, but it won't happen right away. Now he has to go from 4-star, anointed starter, everything fully on track, to sitting at home and waiting for the phone to ring and kind of accepting that it maybe isn't going to. But in late October, after 2 months of that agonizing wait, he will get the call from the Philadelphia Eagles to go be a part of their practice squad. And if somebody like Tyrese Robinson is looking for inspiration, look no further than Robert Tonyan, who went through almost the exact same thing. He didn't make his first team. He waited. He got another call with a team in the same division even, and ended up catching on with that team. And that was the Packers. For Robinson, it's the Eagles, and he gets a front row seat to their 2022 Super Bowl run. He's on the practice squad the whole time. I don't think he ever got activated, but he did sign a futures contract afterwards, and then tried to make this is where he and Tonyan diverge. He did not make the Philadelphia Eagles, but this time he gets, on cut down day, he gets brought into the Minnesota Vikings practice squad. I think it was cut down day, or it was pretty soon. He's into the Minnesota Vikings practice squad. If you remember last year, they had all kinds of problems with their offensive line, like their deep depth, not their immediate backups, but like deep depth. They were bringing in all kinds of weird guys. And Tyrese Robinson came in and held that job on the practice squad throughout the entire year, signed a futures contract, and now here he is. This is now his third chance to make a team. And this is where, there's kind of nowhere to hide. When you didn't make your first team, you could say, well, there was this draft pedigree thing and I got moved and maybe it wasn't real. When you didn't make your second team, you could call it a coincidence. But now this is the third chance. And whether it is fair or not, like this could be a thing where he gets a twisted ankle and it ruins everything now. Like it's this delicate of a situation. Once you've gone through 3 camps and you haven't made a team, unless you are a freakazoid freak athlete and everybody's got high draft, priority free agent grades on you from forever ago that they want to investigate, for the vast majority of people, that's it. So the longest of long shots here is Tyrese Robinson. He's maybe player 89 on the roster. If he finds a way to make the team or maybe even the practice squad, in and of itself, that becomes a good story of a guy hanging on to his career and his dream by a thread. But the NFL is so brutal and unforgiving that too often this constitutes the end of it. I will see you next week. And as always, Skull.